Hello and welcome to the Could This Happen in Your Program podcast, where we find collaborative solutions to protecting New Yorkers and care. In recognition of April's National Volunteer Appreciation Month, we're discussing the important role volunteers play in some of the Justice Center's most critical programs. Earlier on in the Could This Happen in Your Program series, we introduced you to the Surrogate Decision-Making Committee, a non-court alternative authorized to provide consent for non-emergency major medical treatment and end-of-life care in New York. In this episode, we sit down with Stephanie Arana, SDMC volunteer and contract manager with the Justice Center. She will discuss the critical role volunteers play for programs like SDMC, how the Justice Center supports volunteers through the process, and specific training and resources provided to ensure success. We'll also speak directly with two SDMC volunteers, Nancy Allen and Tanya Davis, to learn what draws them to this work and why they find this specific program so rewarding. This conversation highlights how dedicated community members make a measurable difference in the lives of those we serve. Okay, well, welcome, Stephanie. Thank you so much for joining us here today. As I mentioned in the intro, April is National Volunteer Month, and so we are celebrating all of our hardworking volunteers through the SDMC program in New York State. It's also a very important anniversary for SDMC in general, as it's the 40th anniversary of the launch of the pilot program for the SDMC program in New York. So really exciting stuff. Can you tell us a little bit about your role with SDMC and at the Justice Center?
Absolutely. And thank you for inviting me to be here today. I always love talking about our program, the services that we provide, and our wonderful volunteers. So I serve as the volunteer and contractor manager at the SDMC program. And with that, I have the pleasure of overseeing the work of our about 400 volunteers in the program and our 6 regional contract offices who hold and manage hearings across New York State. So it's a wonderful agency to be working for and program because it really allows me to put my advocacy passion into place to protect people with special needs.
Yeah. And for our listeners who may have missed our earlier episode, we will link it up for those who are watching and listening, but we basically did a whole deep dive on SDMC. But can you give us a little brief summary of what SDMC does, who they are, who the volunteers are?
Yes, I always say SDMC is a very unique program because we're allowed to provide a service that not many states can, right? So SDMC is an alternative to the court system for major medical and end-of-life care decisions for people who qualify.
Okay.
So there are some criteria that we have to look at when we're looking at qualification. So the first thing we're looking at is, does this person have capacity to make their own informed consent? Do they have a surrogate decision maker who could consent on their behalf? If they do not have those items, then they could possibly qualify for SDMC, and it's based on the services that they're receiving. So we can provide services to people who are service recipients of the Office for People with Developmental Disabilities, Office of Mental Health, and the Office of Addiction Services and Support.
Okay. And talk to us a little bit about the volunteers. What are some of the qualifications? Where are they located? What's the process like for applying?
Yeah, so our volunteers are across all New York State because we operate through New York State. To become a volunteer, we look for specific expertise and experience. So at every hearing, we have 4 volunteers, and they would be from one of the following 4 positions. So we have a New York State licensed attorney, a New York State licensed medical professional, which could be a doctor, a nurse, a social worker, a dentist. We have family members or someone who previously received services, and then advocates. And I always like to highlight the dynamic perspectives that everybody brings, because by having these different positions, it allows us to really look at the whole scope that the person will need when people are making decisions medically, ethically, and clinically.
Yeah. And so taking us through the application process a bit, it is you must fit into one of these categories to be a volunteer. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
We do need people who, have the understanding of what people with disabilities need and working in that field, or people with mental health disorders, because we also serve that population. So yes, there is specific criteria, and that's written into law.
Right. Right. So tell us a little bit about the actual panel and the decisions that are being made, because I know not all decisions not all medical decisions qualify for an SDMC decision. So talk us through what types of decisions you're looking at, how the panel is formed, and the process by which they come to a ultimate decision.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's helpful to talk about how the process begins to really get a full scope of what is the panel doing. So for a request to come to SDMC, it's a doctor who would be determining that this person needs invasive medical care, and that the person lacks capacity to provide their own informed consent, at which point an application can be submitted to SDMC. Our team of nurses reviews the request, make sure all the medical information is there and that it meets the legal criteria for us to receive and process the case. Then it goes along to the panel where they review the request and they look at 3 issues specifically. They're looking at, does this person have capacity to make their own decision? Is there a surrogate who's legally authorized and willing and available to make the decision? And is the proposed procedure in the person's best interest? So they're using the case that's been submitted with all of the information and testimony at the hearing to make a final determination.
Awesome. And talk to us a little bit about the Justice Center's interaction with volunteers. We are at National Volunteer Month, and I think, using this, absolutely as a tool to solicit more volunteers is a great opportunity for us and for those looking for a volunteer position out there. So tell us a little bit about what our interaction with the volunteers is like, what the frequency of, how often are they called upon to serve as a volunteer? Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, so it's a very collaborative process, right? I always say without our volunteers, we wouldn't be able to provide this service. And that's really by law, right?
Yeah.
We need our volunteers to serve and make the decision. But we work with the volunteers on an ongoing basis. We're contacting them to see if they're available to serve on a hearing, if they have questions about the process. We're supporting them through that. We provide ongoing training so they understand their roles and responsibilities and how to best support the person and the process. I often like to quote Helen Keller, who is an educator and disability advocate, that alone we can do so little, together we can do so much. Because really from A to Z, the process plays out with the Justice Center doing our work and our oversight, right? And then our volunteers coming in to help guide the process and be a surrogate decision maker. And even our regional coordinators, because I always like to give them a shout out because they really make sure that the process is being played out appropriately, following our guidelines.
Yeah. If someone out there is interested, but perhaps the idea of, making a complex decision or aiding in making a complex decision for an individual sounds daunting, what type of training is offered to ensure that volunteers feel like they are fully up to speed and ready to approach this process as the Justice Center has intended?
Yeah, there's several layers of trainings that we provide. So when someone initially joins our program, we have what's called initial volunteer training. So that helps people understand, the history of SDMC, how to serve as a volunteer and what type of decisions that they're making. And then we offer advanced courses. So if someone wants to serve as a chairperson, I didn't mention this, but we have one of the 4 panel members serves as a chairperson to facilitate the process. We offer that. And then we offer other trainings just to provide ongoing learning opportunities, because we want to make sure that our volunteers have the resources to be the best advocate that they can for the people that they're serving.
So as I said, we're coming up on the 40th anniversary this year of the beginning of the SDMC pilot program in New York State. Can you speak a little bit about the history of SDMC, what predated the SDMC program in New York, and why the change?
Yeah, I love talking about the history because I think it really shows the effectiveness of our program. So prior to SDMC, decisions for medical consent had to go through the court system, which, was a cost. And there was a delay. There was a lot of backlog of cases. So the legislator decided that they should create the SDMC program. And when they did that, they put a lot of careful thought into it in terms of who should be making these forms of decisions for someone with a disability, because they're sensitive sensitive decisions, and it requires knowledge of the supports people need. So it was launched as a pilot program in 1985 in 10 counties. So it wasn't all in New York State. And then once it was found to be effective, it was expanded statewide in 2001. And then we were given jurisdiction to make end-of-life decisions in 2009. And one thing I just want to note there is end-of-life decisions, we only have jurisdiction to provide for a person with an intellectual or developmental disability. So you know how I talked about major medical, we have OMH and OASIS, those individuals wouldn't qualify.
Got it. Okay. So as you know, the Justice Center exists to create a safer, more inclusive New York for all New Yorkers. And I think we'd be remiss if we didn't mention SDMC among many of our safeguards that we have here at the Justice Center to protect those populations that we serve. Can you speak a little bit about those safeguards and how that translates into the work that SDMC provides?
Yeah, I think key components of SDMC is protection, advocacy, and timeliness. In creating a collective group of volunteers that makes the decision, it makes sure that not one single person is making the decision, that there's balanced perspectives and shared responsibilities. And I think that that's a crucial part of our process. With SDMC, not every case is approved. And I think that means the process is working because if the individual can provide their own informed consent, our volunteers, and our volunteers really look at that and want to make sure that they're protecting autonomy and self-determination. And the same thing comes with surrogacy. If there's a surrogate decision maker or family member that could be making the decision, they are the preferred decision maker. And same thing with best interest. They are very thorough. There's certain standards in the law that also helps with those safeguards, which I like to highlight because I think that's another area where the legislator was just really made a deep decision-making process in terms of what should be involved when people are making these decisions. And so at every request, they're also looking at the proposed medical care and looking at the risk benefits alternatives to really make sure that individually for this person, this is the best treatment plan for them.
Yeah, well, it's such a vital program in New York, and we're so excited to be able to celebrate it on such a special anniversary this year. So any last thoughts before we head into our next guest interview? Any final, just notes you want to add on the SDMC program?
What I would mention is that if anybody is hesitant about volunteering, I would say contact our program. I think that I've talked to so many volunteers in our program who have explained how fulfilling the service is to be able to provide a decision for people who do not have family. And we work with a lot of volunteers who are family members themselves, who are in the direct care world, supporting people with disabilities. So if you're hesitant, give us a call. The opportunity is flexible. I know a lot of times, even when I'm thinking about a volunteer position, I'm thinking about balance, right? I work. Can I do this? Thankfully, we only expect volunteers to dedicate about 4 times a year, in terms of service, and it could be more. So I would just really want to highlight the impacts that our volunteers really make by the care and attention that they give to our process and the people that we serve.
Awesome. Well, we will absolutely link up the contact information for SDMC as well as, give a little briefing on the application process. But thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate it. And thanks for teaching us a little bit more about the SDMC program.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, well, welcome, Nancy and Tanya. Thank you so much for joining us today. So I'm going to begin. Can you just take a moment, introduce yourselves, and why you decided to join SDMC as volunteers?
Nancy, would you like to start?
Okay, thank you. So I started about 25 years ago, I think, and I was working as a speech-language pathologist in SUNY Plattsburgh, and I thought I was contacted because of that professional background, but I learned later that it was just because I was a chronic volunteer and they'd gotten my name from another organization. So
you were on the list.
I was on the list. So that was pretty cool. And that's it. I have I had a cousin who was born with developmental disability, and she was born in the 50s, and always hospitalized. And so that was a really sad part of the family story. And so I was glad to help in some way in that connection.
That's lovely.
Go ahead, Tanya.
And for my part, I'm going to steal your term chronic volunteer. That's an affliction I share, but
I wouldn't say affliction. I feel like it's a value. It's a value add.
I would agree. I am an attorney. I was in the private sector for several years, and then I switched over to the public sector. And when I did that, I was offered a CLE on being an SDMC volunteer, which I took. And I, being the parent of a developmentally delayed daughter, was very interested, volunteered right away, and I've been doing it ever since.
Well, that's a great segue. So you've both been involved in the program for quite some time. So what has been the most rewarding to you as volunteers?
I think that the most interesting part is how devoted the staff is, the home care and the people in the programs who come and testify. Just to see how much they care about the people that they're working with is just inspiring to me to go ahead and care more for those people who can't take care of themselves.
I would agree with that. I really deeply appreciate seeing how devoted the staff is to the people in their care. And I would also say that given that we've both done a lot of volunteering, this is an opportunity that, other areas, I've been a school board trustee, I've been a Girl Scout leader. This is something where the work you do is visible almost immediately. You can see tangible results of your efforts right away, and it's very rewarding in that way.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, speaking of, has there been a specific case? I mean, we talked a little bit about the process with Stephanie Orana earlier in this episode. Can you recall a specific case that you were working on that really touched you specifically and made that really reinforce that value of the SDMC program to New Yorkers?
I thought about this question a lot because you gave it to us beforehand.
Yeah, that's our trick, right?
Yeah. Two cases stand out. One that it was a mother who had 5 children, none of whom would step forward as a surrogate, and that was really sad. And the other was also the lack of a surrogate for a young woman whose parents left her to go back to their home country, and they left her here. And maybe they thought she would get the best care here in our country. But it was sad to think that her parents abandoned her when she was only 20 years old or so.
Yeah.
Yeah, those ones stick with you. I think for my part, it's every single end of life hearing I've had. They're always hard. I always feel like we've come to the right decision, regardless of what that is, because of the dedication and the deliberation that we go through. But it's never an easy decision. Right. And I'm deeply grateful that the process is there so that people don't need to suffer unnecessarily.
And you have to think and hope that that due process is there to ensure that we've taken the time to really evaluate this person's circumstances and what the best, most meaningful next step might be, whatever that is, whether it's an end-of-life decision or another healthcare decision.
I think one of the things about those end-of-life cases is that having the time to deliberate with 4 of us on the panel really helps, because you do get other opinions and you come to a decision that's mutual. In most cases, there's almost always agreement, and people have talked through what the concerns are. And that's really rewarding too, to be able to work with other people who are just as concerned as you are.
Definitely.
Absolutely. And so you both mentioned your own professional careers on top of your volunteering experience. How would you say that SDMC has provided you opportunities to connect with other maybe similar or, unfamiliar groups or people or other volunteers that have given you maybe networking opportunities within the SDMC group?
Well, I'm retired, so that's not really an issue. But
maybe social.
It has let me keep in contact with the medical field in a way that I wouldn't have otherwise.
Absolutely.
And for my part, I am still working, but I am in administrative appeals, and most of my work is done with a small staff on papers. So being involved in hearings, getting to work with all kinds of different people, it helps me retain some of those skills that I wouldn't otherwise get to use on a daily basis.
And probably still, even though you're retired, it helps you use your skill set that you gleaned over however many years of working in a new or interesting way.
Indeed, being a chronic volunteer, it's not the only volunteer activity that I participate in. So yes.
And I've learned how to pronounce a myriad of medical terms that I would never have learned how to pronounce otherwise.
Exactly.
Yes. Something maybe you didn't think that outside of biology class you would have to.
That's correct.
You would have to recall.
Siri and Alexa have been a lifesaver for those moments when I need to pronounce those words.
What is that acronym again? Yeah. So many folks out there are volunteers to help others in some specific way, and maybe considering a new volunteer position. What would you say to someone who might be on the fence as to wanting to join the SDMC community as a volunteer? What would you say to encourage them?
I would say that, again, it's one of the volunteer experiences that I've had that is the most rewarding almost immediately. I mean, it's a high reward for the amount of input into the work. You can volunteer on your own schedule. I've had many times where I've had to decline a hearing, and it's no big deal. They just come back and ask you again next time. And it's something you can do whether you're working, whether you're retired, and it's very rewarding.
I agree with everything you said. Yeah. And I love the camaraderie of working with a team, and you get to know your other team members over the time because you see the same faces over and over, and you do begin to work as a team. As a chairperson, you learn who's going to be most interested in which questions and where their expertise is. And you also learn to know the nurses and the medical staff because you see them over and over again, and you know what their strengths are and where they're going to, who's going to have every I dotted and T crossed on the paperwork.
Well, this will air in April, and April is National Volunteer Appreciation Month, and I can think of no better way to commemorate that month than having two longstanding volunteers on our podcast episode. So we really thank you so much, Tanya and Nancy, for joining us today, and we hope this has inspired some other folks who might be out there listening to join the SDMC community. It's a really great opportunity to get out there, volunteer, and make a difference in people's lives.
Thank you for the invitation.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.